We're back and we're moving into our first conversation for this morning, and we are joined by the Ambassador of the European Union, Malgorzata Wasilewska. I got it as close as I could. Good morning and welcome back.
Good morning. Lovely to be back.
How are you?
I'm very well and happy to be back in Belize as always.
Yes. So we caught you in the midst of a two-day seminar that is ongoing, and it's between Belize along with other CELAC members. So we want to do a refresher as to where this particular summit was first born, and it was actually in 2015.
Correct.
So can you take us back to that time and why this has become a priority now?
Sure. So this particular seminar is part of an action plan which was agreed back in 2015 in Brussels during the summit between the CELAC countries, so Latin American, Central American and Caribbean countries, and the European Union. So one of the points on the action plan was to focus on what could be done better on citizen security. And this is a workshop. There were two seminars, one in The Hague in Europe, one in Panama, and now the workshop here in Belize, which I'm very delighted about. It's an effort of very hard work of Belizean ambassador in Brussels, who had a dream that this workshop could be here, and here we are. So thank you, Mr. Dylan Vernon, ambassador. And we had a very successful first day. The seminar is focusing on how to enhance police cooperation, intelligence exchange, cross-border cooperation to tackle crime and citizen security. But what is quite innovative is that we're also looking on the involvement of civil society and local government. We had a fantastic session yesterday, almost 2.5 hours, extremely well attended, discussing how civil society organizations and local government can assist the administrations on tackling those issues. And there were excellent examples of how well this is already working in various countries across the region.
What's the significance of it being hosted here?
Belize had the presidency of SICA,
yes.
So ideally we were hoping to have it before the end of the year, but you know what it's like at the end of the year. Everything speeds up, everybody tries to deliver everything, so it's very good to have it in January in a slightly more relaxed.
Can I jump off the deep end?
Depends what.
The focus of the workshop is citizen security, following through from plans that we've been making since 2015. But this region is almost volatile right now. Belize, on its territorial dispute with Guatemala, and the projections in terms of how that vote might likely go, might cause some tension that might affect citizen security. And also our Southern American neighbors, the Venezuelans, are in the thrust of a very combustive situation where there have been exchanges between the president of that country and the US diplomats, which could create a very explosive situation. How much of where the region is going to be, probably in the next year or 2 years, can you accommodate for in these planning and coordinating sessions?
You already did jump off
yes,
the deep
I
end.
did.
We are not discussing the big geopolitical picture. This is more of a technical kind of discussion, because what is missing is cross-border cooperation. And today, the nature of crime is such that no country can tackle, no matter how large or small, can tackle the crime issues alone, because organized crime is cross-border. And organized crime does not acknowledge borders, and the criminals are so creative today that they evolve faster than we can respond. If you think of cybersecurity, that's a huge challenge. If you think of vulnerability of people due to economic or political situations, they thrive on all of that. So we are talking about how police and border services can work better in order to tackle that. So it's a more technical conversations. Why is it that governments find it sometimes difficult to work with civil society organizations who have much better access to what is going on at the community level? What are the real root causes of whatever insecurity is ongoing there. So I will not follow you off that deep end, but let me just say that the levels of homicide in Belize, in the region, in the wider region, are so high that we really have a responsibility as European Union to assist the governments as well as we can to try and understand what are the root causes, how to tackle those root causes, what is our role as donors and partners in assisting the governments in solving those problems. And as you know, European Union is a peace project in itself, so we always stand for peaceful resolution of all conflicts and disputes and a lawful resolution. Rule of law is extremely important to us as regional organization and to us as people. But we are also an extremely good example of regional cooperation, cross-border cooperation. So we have mechanisms, we have success stories, how police cooperates, cross-border cooperation, and identifying crimes, and finding and prosecuting criminals. That's also very important.
That coordination, though, between the police on the ground and the crimes that could happen, these trans-border crimes, the geopolitical situation will affect it, even in terms of resources or in terms of attention and political focus. And my question is not necessarily what the European Union's position is on either of these situations, but whether or not the planning incorporates that it will create a dynamic shift in the way that you even coordinate. And so that was more my question.
Sure, but we're not about coordinating about what happens in the region. These are sovereign countries, and we will always stand for certain principles, democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights, but we assist and we partner. Okay, so for example, our development assistance to Belize, and we are the biggest grant donor here in Belize. Over the last 30 years, we brought here more than 200 million euros to the people of Belize. So, but it's not based on conditionality. So we have dialogue, we have political dialogue where we discuss values that we share, where we offer assistance in certain areas, but we're not in the business of telling people what to do. So this is partnership, it's very important. Now, so we don't coordinate what goes on in the region. There are other mechanisms for doing that, but we stand ready to share our success stories and examples and mechanisms on how to do this. But you're absolutely right. No matter how well the technical cooperation is set up, no matter how much funding there is, no matter how much goodwill there is at the technical level, there has to be political will for that, for example, for intelligence sharing, right? And for addressing issues of organized crime. So that element is also essential. But this workshop is more about technical cooperation and what needs to be in place for that to work.
And before we get into the details, sorry. For Belizeans, and we have a large Belizean audience also in the diaspora, one of the things for us was the issue of the absence of one of our major partners in terms of citizen security. The Guatemalans absented themselves. Are you satisfied with the reasons that they have given, and does that create any concerns in terms of the way that the coordination is going? You can't be having plans and one of the primary stakeholders in terms of the relationship for us.
Sure, but you know, absent. This is you pulling me in that direction again.
Just a important question. Sorry.
There is an ongoing. Remember, I'm also an ambassador to Belize, not to Guatemala.
Yes.
There is a constructive, good bilateral cooperation and dialogue between Belize and Guatemala. So I'm sure there'll be a space and a forum for discussion on that. You know, people sometimes don't come to these workshops for reasons which are completely beyond our control. You know, some people have sent delegations from the capitals, others have sent them from Brussels missions. The timing isn't always right for everybody. So I wouldn't read too much into it, and I have full trust in the political dialogue and cooperation between the government of Belize and Guatemala to look at those issues in a different forum.
And what was Guatemala's reason for not attending?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Because I don't know. You know, this workshop is organized by my colleagues in headquarters.
Sure.
They run the whole process. So I'm sure that there were compelling reasons.
We hope so.
Why they were not here, just as much as some of the other countries could not send people from headquarters. January is a time when you have projections and hopes for the new year. You know, there are various things going on.
One of the shortest trips, though, from Guatemala to Belize is one of the shortest, next to Mexico.
You know, but the results of the workshop can be shared and discussed. Absolutely. And I'm sure my colleague, ambassador of European Union in Guatemala, will be happy to do that. And when I come here, I always try to meet with the Guatemalan ambassador. We have very good exchanges. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, the good dialogue is there.
Yes.
So I want to go back to the issue of citizen security. And one of the things I think that may puzzle people is that there has been a substantial amount of money invested, not just by the European Union, but other international partners as well, in trying to enhance the cross-country cooperation, in enhancing the local infrastructure, whether it be roads or equipment or even technical training. So what are the identified gaps, and why hasn't all the resources that has gone into this particular issue not come to fruition as yet?
I think the reasons are always complex. It is about how the security, I'm speaking a little bit more generally, how efficient the security sector is, what is the trust between the citizen and the security providers, be it police, be it defense force, how efficient are border controls, what can flow into the country and out of the country. Mm-hmm. Because as I said today, there are certain things that you can do at a national level, and there are challenges, for example, lack of resources. In Belize, I think the training of police officers could be, to my knowledge, longer,
yes.
With a stronger human rights element in yes. order to make sure that this is a service and not a force, in order to build trust and so on and so forth. But the dialogue between, you know, the so-called community policing is based on dialogue, that there is a constant exchange and conversation between police officers covering a certain community and community members, so that the police are aware what the issues are. So it could be multiple, but no country today, as I said, can tackle particular organized crime, flow of weapons, flow of drugs alone, because the routes are so long. And I don't know the statistics here for Belize, but majority for countries that don't produce their own weapons, the homicides, the murders are committed by illegal weapons. So there's a challenge there as well. Mm-hmm. So it isn't just a question of funds. I think it's a question of focus, how things are organized, good dialogue, understanding the root causes, but having constant consultations and a dialogue. You know, mm-hmm. sometimes communities don't feel safe for very simple reasons that are to do more with infrastructure than security providers. But there needs to be that dialogue between local government, security, and community members for everybody to understand how to address it.
And sometimes, you know, I think that lack of security comes from what people feel is a lack of accountability with the players who may be involved in organized crimes. How does that fit into a dialogue like this?
It is about setting a mechanism, and about learning from each other. There are representatives at the workshop from countries that have been quite successful. For example, there's a very good program at the moment in El Salvador that looks exactly at that, at the community level issues. And just in 1 year, they had a pretty substantial reduction in terms of killings. So that there's a fantastic example already there. There are other countries. Colombia has had a lot of success in dealing with organized gangs. What is it that we can learn from them that can be accessible to other countries? But this is, as I said, this is just one level. Mm-hmm. What we're hoping today is to propose and agree that there will be a regular ongoing dialogue after these workshops that were agreed and the action plan are over, because it's needed. And I think you're never going to have one response that fits all, because the approach is always you have to understand what the problem is, specific for the country, what are the dynamics in that country, what are the weak points and strong points before you you can design a response. And then also the cooperation.
What's been identified as some of the gaps so far?
I think I did not. Yesterday we had some parallel sessions, but there is not enough of cooperation between police, intelligence, and border controls in the region. So people have very good examples of what works maybe at the national level, but there are not good enough mechanisms to tackle the cross-border transfers and the cooperation with civil society and local government. That's not quite there. There is a mistrust. You know, a lot of government officials see civil society as not as a source of expertise and accountability and sort of bridge building with community, but more as critics.
Can you, before we go there, but can you qualify what you mean by border management? Because if one were to imagine organized criminals moving across borders, they're not using your regular immigration areas. When we see illegal landings, they're not using the official airstrips. They're doing these things in very clandestine ways.
Sure, and the mechanisms are always the same for weapon smuggling, for drug smuggling, and for people smuggling. Mm-hmm. So there are, you know, I'm not exactly an expert on that, but it's either having corrupt officers or basically finding loopholes wherever they are and however they exist. And they are, for example, for weapons, you have people who are experts on diverting legal trade to illegal trade just by changing certificates and so on and so forth. And somebody always profits, and there are people along the whole chain who profit from that. And you know, no border control is perfect anywhere in the world, because you cannot man long borders every meter of the way. But there are tools today. There are radars. Technology has progressed hugely. So it's a matter of will, political will, it's a matter of resources, but it's also a matter of very efficient security sector and then justice system.
Can you outline for us in essence, what the action plan would look like, and what specifically would be Belize's role, separate or unique from any other participant?
The action plan was already agreed in 2015. I don't have a copy of it. This is one of the points on the action plan, to have these workshops on citizen security. The dialogue that we want to propose will basically, the content of it will depend on what the needs are and what the participants and the countries identify as of interest to them. My hope is that, because this is a large group, having all these countries represented, that there'll be certain things in common for all the CELAC countries, but then some conversations and cooperation will be in smaller groups, because not everybody shares exactly the same challenges. So there's, you know, for Belize as a small country, resources are an issue. Obviously, the issue of the border dispute is quite topical and timely. I know the referendum is coming on the 10th of April. I look forward to being here for the referendum myself. But it's also how to exchange the intelligence, who are the counterparts in the countries that are affected by the issue that you're dealing with. It could be an issue of equipment sometimes. Let's see.
Now, if you were to say, looking at the experience of yesterday, what's been some of the tangible outcomes that you've been able to see so far?
For me, the most interesting session, as I said, is the one on civil society and a role of local government, because the space is not there yet for regular for the partnership, for participation of civil society, and I think for Belize that's also a challenge. As I said, there is no regular dialogue. Even for development of policy, there is an understanding amongst government officials that civil society should have a voice and a role in that, and which civil society organization and what for. Whereas if you develop a policy, civil society should be there from the very beginning, because they understand sometimes much better what is missing for the community people. They translate policies, they guarantee the ownership, but they also provide fantastic expertise. Now, in this particular example, think of a community that is troubled with sexual violence, with killings, and a police officer or government official goes in and tries to talk to the community. What are your issues? How many people will speak frankly and honestly? How many will trust that the information they are giving is actually not going to backfire against them? This is where civil society is essential, or local government is essential, because if you have a consultation and you bring people to the table and they trust that what they're telling the police, the local government, the representative of ministry will actually be used constructively, this is where you start finding solutions. And sometimes they're simpler than you think.
You know, excuse me again to ask this question, but there is an agreement for a grant of 14 million
For
the project in terms of building of a road in St. Bite, I believe. Am I?
We've just finished a road in Hopkins, and then George Price Highway.
Yes.
There is a European Union grant, and then a loan from IDB.
Which is in coordination with these efforts in relation to the...
This is infrastructure.
Just infrastructure.
This is infrastructure. The Hopkins that I just said, this is, you know, we just finished the two big programs on accompanying measures for sugar and bananas. And part of those programs had infrastructure, and to improve access, to improve, you know, there was a social component and there was an infrastructure component to generally improve the quality of life of the people, to give them alternative options for employment. So there was training as well as improving efficiency of the sectors as well to make them more competitive.
Yeah. There are two components to me to citizen security. One is the international component, which is the trans-border relations and coordination, etc. But that is dependent on the quality and capacity of the local infrastructure. And you've divided it into two, governmental and civil society. Where are we in terms of the robustness or lack thereof of those both those entities, in terms of governmental capacity and where it is, and also in terms of the strength and capacity of our civil society in Belize?
We actually not supporting, the security sector is not one of the areas that the European Union is supporting right now. So I'm not an expert on details of your security forces. What I do know is that Minister of Foreign Affairs, while he was also security minister, expressed a desire that there would be maybe a longer or better training for police officers, and to what extent the European Union could maybe assist by either providing possibility for some police officers to have part of the training in one of the European countries. But you are a small country with not very many people, so I'm sure I can say with confidence that resources are a challenge in terms of policing, in terms of border control, in terms of your defense capacities in general. Training, I'm sure. I think when we were speaking to human rights organizations last year, they were identifying a lack of adequate human rights training for security providers, specifically for police. And that's an essential part, because for good, responsible, community-type policing, human rights awareness is a huge part of it. And that awareness then helps to build trust. So I'm sure those are areas that could be reinforced. But I'm not really in a position to comment in terms of overall capacity. Our main focus is here at the moment are health and energy. So renewable, clean, sustainable energy, accessible to people, energy efficiency, those are the areas that we are just embarking on. And retrofitting 3 regional hospitals and 3 community hospitals to make them resilient to disaster, to make them energy efficient, to guarantee access to health to Belizeans. Those are the main areas of our assistance at the moment.
Those are priority areas, yeah.
Absolutely, but we also do support civil society organizations through our funds for democracy and human rights. And there are some projects ongoing on with indigenous community, for example, on gender-based violence.
Now, you mentioned something, and I think it is actually one of the critical points that I've been thinking of. Belize, because of the size of our country, the size of our population, is obviously limited in resources. So we would be deemed, I think, the underdog in this process. When you talk about being able to keep up with ensuring the cross-country communication and collaboration. I'm not saying that we're not doing it, but we'd have challenges in being able to do so. When a dialogue like this comes together, we're most dependent on having the relationships all around us be as strong as possible, because by size, by population, we're weaker. By resources, we're weaker. How is that a part of the conversation in terms of being able to ensure that those countries, those developing countries like Belize, are properly supplemented, because we'd never be able to meet just the sheer number or resources that our neighboring countries may have?
Well, that's up to the government of Belize to establish or to sustain good relationships with the neighbors. Mexico has a big presence here, and there's to my understanding, very good, very constructive cooperation with Mexico. Guatemala, there is a big improvement. Ambassador is here. There is a dialogue. We have to see what the referendum brings. But a peaceful settlement of that long-going dispute, I'm sure would help a lot in terms of relationships. We are supporting the work of the OAS at the border for resolution of conflicts that occur there, for peace building on both sides of the border, for cross-community cooperation, dialogue. There are even language classes for people living on both sides of the border. But you're right, a small country or a small island, because I also cover some islands in the Caribbean, there's always a challenge, which is why working together and cooperating is crucial. Belize is unique because it's a bridge builder between CELAC countries and between the Caribbean. So although small, the voice of Belize matters very much because of the membership in both countries. So I'm very optimistic and very hopeful that the voice of Belize will continue being crucial in these conversations.
We're also most vulnerable.
You're vulnerable, but vulnerability is there also, in particular across the Caribbean. A lot of small islands have challenges that are also enormous. But this is why we're here, and we need to see where these conversations will take us and what will be the conclusions and what are the specific needs of the countries, and then how we can assist. There is a huge regional envelope for CARICOM countries. I think it's close to about 50 million a year across the region that is spent on integration, on close cooperation. Security is one of the three main pillars under the regional envelope, and Belize also benefits from that. So the resources are there, provided by us, but there needs to be political will, and then we need to know exactly what would benefit the countries in order to make citizens of Belize more secure.
Were there best examples that have been shared that perhaps have been replicated or tweaked to be used in other countries, especially when we're talking about some of the criminal elements within the local context? So you mentioned gangs in Colombia, I think you said, and being able to address that issue there. Has there been that good practice sharing as well as a part of the dialogue?
Yes, there are people sharing examples of what has worked in various countries of the region, but also what has worked for us as Europe. There are programs that are successful, for example, for Latin America and Central America. Caribbean is not part of some of them. So there's a lot going on, but I think we need to do more. And the cooperation between the countries, when I look at CARICOM dynamics, is not always as good as it could be. I think a lot more needs to be done in working together. When I go to the three countries that I cover, the issues of security are always very high on the agenda, but it does seem to me as if everybody's trying to reinvent the wheel by themselves rather than learning from what others are doing.
Is that just a challenge of integration of such far far countries?
I could ask you.
Well, I mean, you have the practical experience of the European Union, where at least you're next to each other, and its accessibility is easier, even for information.
Sure. I mean, I would, I'm sure you understand the dynamics of CARICOM and SICA better than I do. Why is it that the cooperation isn't closer? For CARICOM, the physical distance makes it sometimes difficult. But I'm sure it's not the only reason. We're very much encouraging integration and cooperation because we see for ourselves how much better it is to work on certain things together, not just in terms of resources, but in terms of expertise and then the final impact.
The projection for improvements, a timeline, there must be an ideal timeline to say, okay, well, in so many years we hope to make this progress or to pass these milestones. And there must be an idea, at least a general one, of where we're going and how we're going to get there. Could you talk to us about how this ideally unfolds and what at the end of the day the donors, the European Union would say, okay, we've made significant progress and we have not wasted the funds and the time.
I wish I had the crystal ball like that to be able to give you that. But as I said, you overestimate our role. We accompany and we partner. We can encourage that those kind of plans are made by the countries, but we support the vision, the implementation of the vision for the future that countries develop themselves. So it is not possible to say that in 5 or 10 years' time this will happen. But we are, for example, in our assistance to Belize, the current financial cycle ends in 2020. And this year we will start conversations with the government on what should be the priorities beyond that. But we do not impose those priorities. Sure. Again, it's the Vision 2030 that drives your own development goals. And then we, together with the government, decide in which areas our assistance can be most effective. And this dialogue is not at that stage yet of putting timelines and concrete plans.
Surely you must have an idea and you must be monitoring to see, listen, this is your plan to do X by 2030. Then the pace that you're on probably will not get you there. So there must be an assessment because you don't just dump your money into things that don't yield and yield in a reasonable
But we're not talking about choosing a security sector as next priority for Belize yet. When we choose a sector, health, energy, the same for sure, there is then a concrete plan. What has to be achieved? What are the deliverables year by year? And then we monitor this very closely, as well as look how our funding is contributing to achieving those goals. This is early stages of a much bigger conversation, and before we get to if the government decides that security should be one of the sectors for the next financial cycle, then we will have to see what aspects of security we could fund and what policies we could support, because we do not support hard security.
How much longer will this conversational part of the
workshop ends today? Let's see what we decide at the end of today, and then a regular dialogue. Whether the dialogue will happen in a large group or in smaller groupings, that's still to be
So what is
decided.
the desired outcome at the end of today?
That there is an agreement that there will be a regular dialogue, some sort of shape or format of that dialogue, and what the next steps should be. Some of the countries that are present here have the security, citizen security sector as one of the sectors supported by the European Union. For example, in Jamaica, we managed to get additional funding specifically for citizen security, but this does not mean everything. That does not mean defense force, police force, and whatever. Very specific aspect, more social component of citizen security, social issues at the community level that contribute to people going towards criminal activity. So let's see what the future brings for Belize.
Now, Ambassador, before you leave, I do have to ask you this question. Of course, the entire world is paying attention to what's happening with Brexit. What is the position of coming out of the European Union at this time, as we all anxiously watch what is taking place in the UK?
It's indeed a very difficult time. 29th of March is around the corner, and everybody's speculating whether there will be a request for extension of Article 50 or not. But as far as European Union is concerned, the agreement is there, and the position is that that's the deal on the table, and it will not be renegotiated. But you know, every day is a surprise. Let's see what happens. The Europe of 27 will continue strong, but of course, it will be very sad day when UK leaves.
Is there any indication as to the possibility of an extension or whether it's being considered?
This is way above my pay grade. It's decided by much more important people inside our headquarters, but as far as I understand, no request has been made. So when that request is made, the negotiator and European leaders will decide whether it can be extended or not. But remember, there's also European Parliament election in May. So that may complicate things a little bit. But I have excellent cooperation with my counterparts, British High Commissioners, both in Jamaica as well as here in Belize. And I have no doubt that we'll continue working very closely together and complementing each other, because whether together or separate, we will continue sharing the same values: democracy, human rights, rule of law, and I'm sure we'll work very well together for the benefit of people of Belize.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in and having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be focusing on the University of Belize. Stay tuned.